Friends, thank you for being here today. What if I told you that the entire geopolitical posture of our nation, our economic sovereignty, and our leverage against an increasingly unpredictable world could be decided by a single ballot cast in a quiet suburb of Montreal? Are we prepared to recognize that the upcoming by-elections on April 13th are not merely localized political contests, but the very crucible in which Canada's capacity to defend itself against aggressive, foreign-first economic policies will be definitively forged? As we begin this deep dive, I'm curious to know your initial thoughts. Do you feel a majority government is the only way to protect our interests? Or do you prefer the checks and balances of a minority? Please share your perspective in the comments below. It's your voices that drive the heart of this channel. We gather our thoughts today at a moment of profound quiet gravity, in the relentless, often deafening noise of the modern global political arena, a theater disproportionately dominated by the loud, emotionally volatile, and deeply partisan spectacles emanating from the United States. It is easy to lose sight of the meticulous mathematics of parliamentary democracy. Yet it is within these quiet calculations that the true architecture of national power is built. On April 13, 2026, voters in 3 ridings will go to the polls. To the casual observer, by-elections are midterm administrative housekeeping. But to those who study the intricate machinery of governance and international relations, Nhung Quoc, Chaijuaku the Nai Tai Scarborough Southwest, University Rosedale, Va Terrebonne Jai Dien Cho Mot Buok Ngoat Lich Sukua Canada. To truly understand the sheer weight of this moment, I want us to begin with a clinical, dispassionate look at the parliamentary mathematics. The House of Commons, our great democratic institution, seats 343 members. To govern with absolute, unimpeded authority, to form a majority government, a party must command 172 seats. As it stands today, His Majesty's government, led by Prime Minister Mark Carney, holds exactly 169 seats. The arithmetic is stark, unforgiving, and exceptionally clear. 3 vacancies exist, and the Liberal Party requires 3 absolute victories to cross the threshold from a vulnerable minority to a fortified majority. Now, we have to recognize that this is not a matter of mere partisan triumph. It is a matter of national security and economic sovereignty. A majority government equips the Prime Minister with the legislative armor required to insulate Canada's economy from global volatility. More importantly, it provides a unified, impenetrable front against an increasingly protectionist Washington that, regardless of its administration, continually flirts with policies that treat its northern neighbor not as a vital partner, but as a competitor to be squeezed. So, let's take a walk across this electoral battlefield together. We'll start in the relative safety of urban Toronto, and then we'll head straight to the razor's edge in Quebec. In Toronto, we look at Scarborough Southwest and University Rosedale. Scarborough Southwest was previously held by Bill Blair, who secured a commanding 30 percentage point margin of victory in the last general election. University Rosedale was the domain of Chrystia Freeland, who dominated with a staggering 40-point margin. Statistically, these are Liberal fortresses. However, their significance extends far beyond their predictable vote yields. Look at why these seats are vacant. Bill Blair departed to serve as Canada's High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. Chrystia Freeland stepped down to take on a role with the Rhodes Trust at the University of Oxford and to serve as an unpaid economic advisor to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. If you look closely, there is a profound, unspoken narrative here about Canada's rightful place in the world. While the United States increasingly turns inward, fractured by isolationist rhetoric and a chaotic retreat from global leadership, Canada is actively exporting its diplomatic and economic expertise to the very centers of global crisis and intellectual tradition. We are demonstrating that Canadian competence, statesmanship, and measured intellect are globally demanded commodities. The voters in these Toronto ridings are not just replacing local representatives, they are ratifying a vision of Canada that remains engaged, respected, and deeply influential on the international stage. If you find this level of geopolitical analysis valuable, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and join our community. We focus on the data and the long-term strategy of our nation, far away from the sensationalist headlines of the 24-hour news cycle. But folks, the true crucible of this entire geopolitical drama lies in Quebec, specifically in the riding of Terrebonne. If you ever want to understand the majestic, quiet power of the Canadian democratic process, you need look no further than the recent history of this one single riding. In the previous general election, the battle between the Liberal candidate and the Bloc Québécois candidate ended in an absolute statistical anomaly. Both candidates secured precisely 38.7% of the vote. After the initial count, the Bloc Québécois was declared the victor. But following a meticulous, transparent, and completely drama-free judicial recount, the Liberal candidate was awarded the victory by one vote. Think about the profound poetry of that reality. In an era where our neighbors to the south engage in endless litigation, conspiratorial frenzy, and violent rhetoric over the results of their elections, the Canadian system resolved a dead heat with profound, unshakable dignity. There were no riots. There were no demands to stop the steal. There was simply the quiet, methodical application of the rule of law. A single citizen, casting a single ballot in Terrebonne, effectively dictated the balance of power in the House of Commons. This is the triumph of intellect and order over emotion and chaos. Democracy, when functioning as designed, is a beautifully quiet thing. I'd love to hear from you on this. Have you ever felt that your single vote didn't matter? This story from Terrebonne proves that in Canada, it truly does. Tell me about your experiences with the voting process in the comments. Now, precisely because of this razor-thin historical margin, Terrebonne is about to become the epicenter of a ferocious, yet uniquely Canadian, political war. The Conservative Party, functionally non-competitive in this specific arena, is relegated to the sidelines, mere spectators to the true contest. The battle is strictly between the federalist vision of the Liberals and the provincial isolationism of the Bloc Québécois. And it is exactly here that we are witnessing a masterstroke of political chess. It's a clear demonstration of the cold, calculated brilliance that Prime Minister Mark Carney brings to the leadership. Rather than relying on the loud, emotionally manipulative rallies that characterize American populism, the Liberal apparatus is utilizing strategic geographical and institutional positioning. Consider the timeline. The Liberal National Convention is scheduled to take place at the Palais de Congrès de Montréal from April 9th to the 11th. The by-elections occur a mere 48 hours later on April 13th. I assure you, this is not a coincidence. It is the deployment of overwhelming strategic gravity. By moving the entire federal apparatus, the senior leadership, the intellectual core of the party, and the entirety of the national media focus directly into the heart of Quebec in the days immediately preceding the vote, the Liberals are projecting an image of inevitable unified federal power. They are dominating the local airwaves, not with angry rhetoric, but with the sheer weight of a governing institution. Make no mistake, the narrative war on the ground in Terrebonne will be defining. The Bloc Québécois will argue their traditional tired thesis that only a party exclusively dedicated to Quebec can protect its interests, and that a Liberal majority will silence the province's voice. They will preach a gospel of defensive isolation. On the other side, however, Prime Minister Carney's counter-narrative is far more sophisticated and, frankly, far more geopolitically grounded. The argument is not just about domestic unity. It is about survival in a predatory global economy. Quebec's vital industries, its aerospace sector, its aluminum production, its massive forestry exports, are heavily reliant on international trade and are uniquely vulnerable to the erratic, protectionist whims of the United States Congress and the White House. Carney will argue correctly that a fractured minority federal government constantly fighting for its own survival in Ottawa cannot adequately defend Quebec's economic sovereignty in Washington or Geneva. To protect Quebec, Canada must be strong, unified, and capable of enacting retaliatory tariffs or defensive economic subsidies without needing to beg for opposition votes. A seat at the table of a majority government is a seat behind an impenetrable economic shield. And that, my friends, brings us to the core geopolitical imperative of our time. It answers the fundamental question of why a majority government isn't just a political luxury, but an absolute necessity for Canada right now. Beyond the trade wars and the tariff disputes, we must consider what a majority government secures for the very fabric of our Canadian lives, our social contract. For generations, we have defined ourselves by our commitment to a publicly funded, universal healthcare system. It is a cornerstone of our national identity, a system that says your health should never depend on the size of your wallet. But let's be clear, our healthcare system is under constant, creeping pressure from the South. American private equity and healthcare conglomerates look at our system and see nothing but an untapped market. They lobby, they influence, and they wait for any sign of federal weakness to push for privatization and the Americanization of our clinics and hospitals. A minority government is often too preoccupied with its own political survival to mount a long-term strategic defense of the Canada Health Act. But a majority government? A majority government has the fiscal and legislative bandwidth to reinvest in the public system, to modernize our infrastructure, and to firmly shut the door on those who would see our healthcare turned into a for-profit commodity. It allows us to say to Washington, our systems are different because our values are different, and to have the political stability to back those words with action. For those of us who have spent decades contributing to this society, knowing that our healthcare and our pensions are secured by a stable, unified government isn't just a political preference, it's peace of mind. I want to pause here and ask, how much does the absolute protection of our public health care mean to you and your family's future? This is perhaps the most personal aspect of our sovereignty. Let's talk about it in the comment section. Furthermore, we must look at our role as a global energy and resource superpower. Canada sits on a treasure trove of critical minerals: lithium, cobalt, copper, the very building blocks of the 21st century green economy. The world is in a desperate race for these resources, and the United States, through its Inflation Reduction Act, is attempting to pull the entire North American supply chain into its own orbit. Without a strong majority federal government, we risk becoming a mere extraction colony for American tech giants, shipping our raw materials south only to buy back the finished products at a premium. A unified government led by an economic mind like Mark Carney understands that Canada must do more than just dig rocks out of the ground. We have the opportunity to build the entire value chain right here, from extraction to processing to manufacturing. But this requires massive, coordinated national strategy and long-term investment that transcends the next confidence vote. It requires the ability to negotiate Canada-first resource agreements with the U.S., ensuring that our environmental standards are respected and that Canadian workers are the ones benefiting from our natural wealth. We need the adult in the room to tell our neighbors that while we are willing partners, we will not be a junior subsidiary of their industrial complex. When we are confronting a giant that increasingly operates on emotional protectionism, Canada's only viable defense is a cold, hard, and entirely unified resolve. We cannot negotiate from a position of domestic instability. A majority government, even a slim one, eliminates the noise. It allows Prime Minister Carney to cross international borders, knowing that his legislative agenda at home is secure. It allows for the rapid, unimpeded passage of crucial spending bills required to support our domestic industries when they are targeted by unfair foreign tariffs. It allows Canada to maintain its vital strategic resource supply chains, critical minerals, clean energy, and secure agricultural output, without having our national strategy held hostage by a domestic opposition playing partisan games. Beyond just defense, a majority government solidifies Canada's preferred method of international engagement, the strict application of the rule of law. We do not win trade wars with the United States by being louder, angrier, or more aggressive. We win by being smarter. We win by being the adult in the room. We utilize the World Trade Organization. We leverage the dispute resolution mechanisms of the USMCA. And we apply targeted, deeply researched retaliatory measures with surgical precision. To execute this sophisticated, data-driven foreign policy, the Prime Minister needs the absolute stability that only 172 seats can provide. Mark Carney, with his unparalleled pedigree in global finance and his tenure at the helms of both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, possesses the exact erudition and steady hand required for this task. But a brilliant architect still requires a solid foundation upon which to build. That foundation is a parliamentary majority. Now, as we watch the lead up to April 13th unfold, we are also witnessing a profound cultural indicator. It is a clear reflection of the unique trajectory of the Canadian electorate. Look at the polling data. The Liberals currently enjoy a commanding 10-point lead in overall vote intention. More tellingly, Prime Minister Carney holds a staggering 30-point lead over Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre in preferred leadership metrics. Those numbers tell a story that goes far, far beyond mere partisan preference. They represent a deliberate, conscious rejection of populism by the Canadian people. Over the past decade, we have watched as a wave of grievance-based, combative populism swept across the democratic world, most notably consuming the political culture of the United States. It is a style of politics that thrives on division, that elevates the loudest voice over the most reasonable argument, and that views compromise as treason. Mr. Poilievre has attempted to import this very brand of loud, abrasive politics into the Canadian House of Commons. But the polls clearly demonstrate that we, as Canadians, are recoiling from it. The baby boomer generation, the generation that built the modern, prosperous, and globally respected Canada, recognizes that our national strength lies in our quiet competence. We look south and we see the exhaustion of a society torn apart by relentless political warfare. We do not want that here. We value our institutions. We value our universal health care, our economic stability, and our reputation as a rational, reliable, international actor. If you agree that Canada's strength lies in our quiet competence and not in imported shouting matches, please hit the like button. It helps this video reach more like-minded Canadians who value reason over rhetoric. By overwhelmingly favoring a cerebral, policy-driven approach over tactics of obstruction and complaint, we are making a profound statement about our national character. We prefer the statesman over the provocateur. We demand analyses based on facts, data, and historical precedent, rather than sensationalism and hollow slogans. If the Liberals secure these 3 by-election victories, it will serve as the final nail in the coffin for the strategy of imported populism. It will permanently diminish the power of an opposition that relies on playing games, forcing Parliament to return to the serious, dignified business of governing a G7 nation. So as we approach the precipice of this monumental decision, we must acknowledge the stark reality of the math. A 172-seat government is the absolute minimum requirement for a majority. It is a one-seat fortress. It is mathematically fragile. It will demand absolute discipline from the governing party. There will be no room for absenteeism, no margin for error, and no tolerance for internal dissent on critical votes of confidence. But let me be clear. The fragility of that margin does not dilute the absolute power it grants. A one-seat majority is still a majority. It still grants the power to convene committees, pass budgets, and dictate the legislative calendar without begging for the support of fractured minority parties. It provides the mandate necessary to govern. Ultimately, the immense gravity of April 13th rests on the shoulders of everyday citizens in Scarborough, Rosedale, and most crucially, Terrebonne. When they walk into the voting booth, they are doing far more than selecting a local member of parliament. They are the architects of our national defense. They are deciding whether Canada will face the coming global economic shifts, the relentless pressure of U.S. trade protectionism, and the volatility of the international stage with a fractured shield or a unified, impenetrable front. We are a nation that has historically punched far above its weight class precisely because we have valued unity, intellect, and the rule of law over division and emotional reactivity. We have always recognized that our sovereignty is not guaranteed by our geographic vastness, but by the strength and stability of our institutions. On April 13th, the quiet, meticulous power of Canadian democracy will speak. And in that quietness, we will forge the shield that protects our future. Thank you for your time and your attention. If you haven't already, please subscribe to stay informed on the issues that truly define our nation's future. I'll be watching the comments closely to see your thoughts on the April 13th results. Until next time, next.